Hey guys, welcome back to part 3 of this amazing story. Today we will be reading chapter 8 through 10. Feel free to read along. Enjoy the video. The next morning, Naruto was kicked awake at 5:30 and told that he had to get up and train. Kisame handed him kubikiri and started dragging the still groggy Naruto out to a clearing. He then drew Samahata and started to explain. Okay, brat, listen up. Itachi and I don't think you're ready for this mission yet, so you're going to be getting a 2-week crash course on how to be a missing nin. Your mornings will be spent doing taijutsu and swordsmanship training with me, and your afternoons will be devoted to Itachi teaching you the more general skills you'll need to stay alive. With no more words, Kisame charged. Caught unaware, Naruto was slammed fully awake as he tried to parry Kisame's first strike. Tried being the operative word. He was thrown backwards by the force of the blow. The next 2 hours were spent pretty much like that. Kisame attacked from somewhere. Naruto tried to block. It took 45 minutes for Naruto figured out that this was not strength, but creativity and instinct training. Naruto figured out early on that he could never overpower than Shark Man, but he found there were tricks he could use. After trying to deflect shuriken with his sword the way he would with a kunai the first few times, he realized that if he turned the sword sideways, it was wide enough to shield him completely. He also found that the best way to block Kisame's attacks was to counterattack. If they both charged each other at the same time, Kisame would lose the momentum advantage he had when Naruto was just standing there, waiting for the impact. Sometime around 7:30 they had breakfast, Kisame and Naruto had bacon and eggs, Itachi had orange pocky. Right after breakfast they were back to training, only this time Kisame was actually teaching. He took Naruto through the basics of holding and swinging a sword, and then taught him some basic routines to practice. Kisame felt this was very important, because he had seen some moments in their pre-breakfast practice where Naruto had pulled off a truly amazing block, only to be overpowered because he was holding the sword in the wrong place or at the wrong angle. By the time lunch rolled around, Naruto was exhausted. After lunch, Itachi replaced Kasame, took one look at him, and declared he needed new shoes. Naruto was still wearing his now rather beat-up impromptu sandals he had made from the remains of his boots. It was for this reason that Naruto found himself in a shoe store in the nearest town an hour later. Naruto had complained that it was a long run for shoes until Itachi mentioned that he sometimes ran for half a day to get his weekly pocky supply. Naruto blindly picked out a pair of boots, which Itachi carefully examined before nodding. Naruto paid for the shoes and they ran all the way back to camp. Naruto, now completely wiped, glared at Itachi across what he had now come to call the training field. Suddenly, without warning, the old Itachi was back, the one that used to give him nightmares. Naruto's body ceased to function as every part of him screamed for him to run, but he couldn't move. Just as quickly, the feeling was gone, and Naruto looked at Itachi in awe as the Sharingan user pulled out a stick of banana cream pocky and started to eat it. Today's lesson, Itachi said between bites, is for you to figure out what I just did. I'll repeat it as many times as you like. And he did just that. The first few times, Naruto was just as shocked and frozen as the first. But slowly, as the afternoon went on, he started to resist the feelings, and as he did, he started to notice little things. The way Itachi shifted his posture slightly, the way his eyes narrowed, the way he angled his head, the way his muscles tightened. The list went on and on until suddenly, Naruto's eyes widened in understanding. Itachi wasn't moving, but somehow. It's everything, Naruto said. You're changing everything. Itachi nodded slightly. Orochimaru calls this killing intent, he said, but what it really is the accumulation of fear stimulus. Seeing the blank look in Naruto's eyes, Itachi tried to come up with another way to explain it. What do people do when you glare at them with your red eyes? Itachi asked. They get afraid? Naruto responded hesitantly. Exactly. And what do they do when you bare your fangs at them? Itachi asked again. They get more afraid, Naruto responded, wondering where this was going. Itachi continued on, right again. But, Naruto, we are a race that has huge numbers of instincts that we never need to use anymore, instincts left over from when we were primitive hunters. And there are over 100 more subtle movements that automatically set off a fear reaction in humans. Naruto felt a chill run down his back, and Itachi continued on. I just shifted my weight as if I was going to attack, and I'm sure you felt some fear? Naruto nodded. So if I were to do 40 or 50 small motions at once, each of which triggered a small fear reaction, they would build up into a paralyzing terror. Naruto finished. Naruto, though, about it for a moment, then grinned, exposing his fangs. Teach me. Naruto spent the rest of the day subjected to Itachi's fear stimulus, as it was explained that he couldn't learn the technique himself until he was fully able to resist its effect. Naruto had absolutely no energy by the time supper rolled around and went to bed especially early, as Kasame's smirk promised another 5:30 wake up. It was in this way that the first week passed, and at this time, both his teachers were impressed with his progress. He wasn't a genius by any means, but his incredible endurance and work ethic made up for it. In 6 days' time, Naruto had learned the basics of handling his sword and had refined and smoothed his motions. He had also learned 15 of the 36 fear stimulus Itachi was planning on teaching him. He had yet to successfully use them all together, but he was working on it. On the 7th day, it was time for Itachi to go shopping for food and Pocky, and it was decided that Naruto would accompany him. On the way to town, Itachi started a conversation about dealing with clients as a missing nin. So say you find out that a client wants to meet you at a certain place and time, Itachi said. What do you do? Naruto thought for a moment. I'd send a clone and watch from a distance, he said. Wrong, Itachi said firmly. Don't you think hunter nins plan for that sort of thing? You should go yourself to meet the client. Anything less would be insulting, but use at least 6 clones as sentries. You don't care if the hunter nins find you. If they are stronger than you, then you're doomed either way, because they will always find you eventually. You just always want to know when they're coming. It's also good to remember that if you're caught in a sting operation, whoever is posing as the client can be used as a hostage or human shield. Naruto absorbed all this information as they arrived in One. Itachi handed him a shopping list and disappeared to the snack store, leaving Naruto to get all the regular food. 2 hours later, both were done their respective tasks, but Itachi wanted to make one more stop. What do you mean, I need a new sword wrapping? Naruto growled. Your current one is too difficult to remove in combat and falls off too easily. Instead of one large piece of cloth that you fold around it, we're going to get you a long strip of cloth to wrap around it, much as Kasame does. Itachi replied calmly. 20 minutes later, Naruto was heading back to camp with a week's worth of groceries and 60 feet of what looked to him like bandages. The only reason he wasn't complaining more than he was that Itachi had paid. After arriving back at camp, things soon fell back into routine, and before Naruto knew it, 4 more days had passed and they were on their way to the hidden sound. During the 3-day trip, they planned and trained, spending every spare minute in preparation. They stopped a day from the sound, as the last 12 hours of the journey Naruto would have to make alone for Itachi and Kisame to stay out of range of the sound's regular patrols. As they sat around the fire eating what would be their last meal together, each was reflecting on the past weeks. For Itachi and Kisame, it had been a unique opportunity not only to teach, but also to spend time with someone who wasn't afraid of them. Everywhere they walked, fear followed. No S-class criminals, not even Orochimaru, had the aura of fear carried by Uchiha Itachi and Hoshigaki Kisame. But here was a boy who was not only immune to it, but also impressed by it. In his weeks with Itachi, Naruto had become quite adept with all 35 fear stimulus and could now simultaneously use 12 without screwing up. Both found themselves developing the same kind of relationship with the boy that they had with each other. They didn't necessarily like each other, but they accepted and tolerated each other. And for people like them, that was enough. Itachi looked up from his musings, laughing slightly at his own emotions. He was a man who had slaughtered his own family, and here he was feeling an attachment, however slight, to a boy he had met only weeks before. But then again, he thought as he watched Kisame try to teach the boy to use his new bandage-like sword wrappings, how did someone define family? A large part of it was a feeling of belonging, which Itachi had never felt anywhere until he became Kisame's partner. So had the Uchiha clan really been his family? He was broken out of his thoughts again as Kasame and Naruto wrestled in a pile of tangled cloth. He smiled as he silently watched them. As the last of the fire was dying out, Naruto got ready to leave. He wanted to arrive at the sound at dawn. Kasame just nodded to him as Itachi handed him his bag. It had been a unanimous decision that any of them would deny to their graves what had happened over the last 2 weeks, so silence seemed appropriate. It would be unlikely that they would ever meet again. Naruto turned and ran out of the camp. Halfway to the sound, he stopped for lunch and found a box of double chocolate Pocky in his bag. Naruto carefully approached the gates of the hidden sound. The gates were open and there was a small amount of traffic going in and out. Naruto waited for his turn and line, then approached the guard. "Who are you and what is your reason for being here?" the guard asked in a bored tone. "Fushigi Naruto is my name, and I'm here to see a swordsmith about getting this." He gestured to the neatly wrapped kubikiri Hocho on his back, fixed up. Naruto spoke without a shred of hesitation. He had practiced his speeches until he knew them backwards and forwards. The guard looked at him curiously. "Village of origin?" "Mist," Naruto replied. "Equivalent rank?" "Chunin." "Time since you left your village?" 1.5 years. The guard appeared satisfied and waved him through. Naruto entered the village with his heart pounding. The last question hadn't been one they'd rehearsed. The next few moments were some of the most anticlimactic of Naruto's life. Hidden Sound looked like, well, a village. He wasn't sure what he had been expecting, but this wasn't it. With the exception of the slightly more rough around the edges look the sound had, it could have been Konoha. Naruto just wandered around for a few minutes, basking in all that was the village of the hidden sound, but he soon remembered that he had a mission, and one that was very dependent on timing. After a few minutes of asking around, he was pointed in the right direction and found himself in front of a house. The nameplate of the door read Kirin, but it didn't look like a shop of any kind. Then he saw smoke coming from the backyard. He jumped over the fence and his face blanched. There was no way this person could be anyone other than Kasame's brother. There couldn't be many people in the world that looked so shark-like. He appeared to be pounding on a red-hot hunk of metal, but Naruto didn't see any fire. He observed the man for another minute or two, watched him dunk the metal into a bucket of water, and suddenly his hands were forming seals. Naruto watched in interest. Suddenly the man spoke. "Gakakyu no Jutsu," he called as he breathed a flame that engulfed the metal. Naruto nodded to himself. Definitely the right guy. Naruto jumped back over the fence and knocked on it. He heard grumbling for a moment before Kirin opened the gate, looking annoyed, and glanced down at Naruto and more pointedly at the wrapped sword on his back. "What do you want, brat?" Naruto grinned. He had more in common with his brother than his looks. Naruto tried to sound professional. "I have a repair job for you. One probably better discussed in private." Kirin looked at him suspiciously, but let him in and closed the gate. He walked to the back door of the house and opened it, gesturing Naruto to go inside. Once they were comfortably seated in Kirin's rather boring living room, Naruto took the sword off his back and with a flick of his thumb, it had taken hours to master the knot that held the bindings, the cloth fell off. Back in Konoha, everyone was on edge. With the attack force leaving in 6 days for the sound, kunais were being nervously sharpened all over the village. The Sand siblings sat nervously in their assigned room. Shortly after Tsunade's announcement, the Sand had sent them a message telling them not to bother coming back, and that the Sand was going to send 170 Nins to support the Konoha attack on the Sound. No one missed the irony of this act. The role the three siblings had been given was containment. They were each given a squad of Chunin, and their task would be to patrol the forest and make sure no one important escaped from the chaos that would be the hidden sound. At this precise moment, Gaara was feeling out of place. Not because he was a demon or a murderer, but because he had nothing to polish. Kankuro was carefully wiping down Karasu, and Temari was buffing her fan with a dry sponge. And all this time, Gaara just sat there, doing nothing. Temari looked at her brother oddly. He had been staring at her hand buffing her fan for about 5 minutes now. It wasn't helping her nerves. She had been in wars before, but this time she was in charge of a group of Chunin, and most of them were from the Leaf. She knew she had the lazy ass and his team under her command, but hadn't really heard much else. Leadership was a responsibility she wasn't sure she wanted. It was more suited to Gaara, with his unshakable calm. Temari spotted a scuff mark and buffed furiously. She supposed all she could hope was that nobody dangerous tried to get past her section of forest. Far away, Kirin was in shock. Kubikiri Hocho, he whispered, as if afraid it would disappear. He reached out to touch it, and after getting an acknowledging nod from Naruto, he picked it up and examined it. "Where did you get this?" Kirin asked. Naruto had practiced this too. I was part of Zabuza's group, and am now the only one left alive. I've started to use the sword myself, but needed it repaired. Kirin looked at him carefully. Do you know how to handle it? Naruto nodded. I've been practicing since Zabuza died, and I like to think I'm proficient. More importantly, how much for you to fix it? Kirin shook his head. I can't be charged for fixing it. The sword isn't broken. It was just never finished. Naruto's eyes widened as Kirin continued. I was driven out of hidden mist before I could finish it. I had heard it had been given to Zabuza the demon, who had also later fled, but I never dreamed I'd see it again. He looked up at Naruto. I don't want any money. It would be my greatest pleasure to finish the sword, but first I need to see you handle it. Naruto would realize later that showing Kirin routines Kasame had taught him probably wasn't a good idea, but Kirin never noticed. It was imperative to the mission that no one, not even Kirin himself, ever find out Naruto had been working with the Akatsuki, so Naruto knew he'd have to be more careful. Kirin nodded after a few minutes of Naruto showing off, but then caught the boy off guard. Okay, so you're good up close. How good is your aim? Naruto blinked. Aim? When you throw it. Kirin looked exasperated. Naruto blinked again. He felt really stupid. After all, the first time he had seen the sword, it had been flying in the air over his head. Kirin sighed. The boy had shown he could handle the sword. Okay, new condition, Kirin declared. I will finish the sword, but after you have to learn how to make use of its full potential, otherwise, you're wasting it, and I won't allow that. Naruto nodded. It was better than he had hoped for. He found out that it would take 5 days of solid work to finish Kubikiri Hocho, and that, until then, Kirin was to be left alone. This left Naruto with 5 days of spare time. He had never had that much spare time before. The first thing he did was find a ramen stand and order 12 bowls, but after that, finding himself with nothing else to do, Naruto decided to train. He found a sound training field and joined those already there. He tried practicing Kirigakure no Jutsu once, then switched to Taijutsu when everyone else on the field glared at him and the mist he was making. He threw himself into training for the next 5 days, fighting to become as strong as he knew he needed to be if he wanted to survive. In Konoha, shinobi were doing much the same, preparing for a war. On the 5th day, Naruto went back to Kirin's shop, and the man himself walked out holding a cloth-wrapped bundle. In Konoha, Tsunade strode up to a podium and faced her troops. Though hundreds of miles apart, and in very different tones of voice, the swordsmith and Hokage spoke in almost perfect synchronization. It's time for you to show me what you've got. Kirin let the cloth fall loose and smirked at Naruto's reaction. The sword looked mostly the same physically, but the blade. The blade had been stained with something to make it dark, almost black and unreflective. It somehow made the sword look more sinister. Naruto reached out to touch it, but Kirin stopped him. Before you so much as touch the sword, Kirin said, you have to understand what it is. It has changed in many more ways than what you can see. Do you know why the 7 Mist Tenkan are called that? Why they are called heavenly swords? Naruto shook his head. Because, Kirin continued, they are more than just swords. That is why they are given names, after all. Each Tenken is forged using a number of forbidden jutsus that allow it to contain a bit of its wielder's essence, and its powers reflect that. My brother Samahata can smell and eat chakra, showing our family's rather shark-like personalities. Kirin grinned, showing his pointed teeth, then continued, quickly becoming serious again. But it also means that taking up one of the Tenken is a lifelong commitment. The sword is part of you until the day you die. Zabuza never had that connection with his sword because the jutsus needed were never done, but you need to understand what you're getting into. Are you sure you still want to go through with this? Naruto thought back to his time with the blade over the last couple of months, how it had started to feel like an extension of his body, and smirked at Kirin. The sword is already a part of me, Naruto said, so it's only fair that I give it some of myself. Kirin nodded and carefully passed the sword to Naruto. Now, I'm not sure what's going to happen when we do this, Kirin said. Most of the Tenkens start looking something like that. He gestured to Kubikiri. When my brother did the blood ritual, his sword grew scales. Naruto raised an eyebrow, but let Kirin continue. First of all, Kirin instructed, you need to carefully slit both your wrists with a kunai. Naruto nervously took out a kunai and did so. The blood ran freely. Now, Kirin continued, hold the sword upside down with both hands so your blood runs down the blade, and with the handle still between your hands. Copy the hand seals I show you. Naruto did so, and as he finished and held the last seal, his blood soaked into the blade, his wrist wounds healed, and he felt something torn out of his body. He fell to one knee, leaning on the sword as a vortex of red and blue chakra spun around him. He felt an odd burning in his belly and looked down to see his seal spinning furiously, exactly as it had done with the Shikafujin Kai. Suddenly, he felt the chakra sucked back into his body, but he watched as the outer two seals on his stomach disappeared, leaving only the spiral seal. Naruto panicked for a moment, then took a deep breath and felt inside his body. He was pleasantly surprised to find the Kyuubi's chakra still sealed, exactly where it was supposed to be. But there was something missing, and he felt an odd tugging at the back of his mind. Hearing Kirin gasp slightly, he came back to the real world and had his breath stolen from him. The dark blade was now engraved, in the most precise detail, with the image of a blood-red nine-tailed fox locked in combat with a deep blue dragon. A moment later, the name inscribed near the handle started to shift, the kanji twisting and reforming to read. Sirai Kirite, Spirit Cutter. As he sat there on the ground, he felt a feeling of confusion emanate from the sword and burst out in hysterical laughter. The sword had taken part of him, but it had also taken the soul of the Kyuubi. 15 minutes and a hell of a lot of explaining later, Kirin was nodding his head. When he thought about it, it made perfect sense. The jutsu was designed to take part of a person's soul, and no matter how powerful the seal, the Kyuubi's soul would be far less attached than Naruto's own, so the jutsu had taken it. This left Kyuubi's chakra inside Naruto, still happily mixing with the help of the remaining spiral seal, as well a confused demon fox inside the sword. That was another thing Naruto found odd. He could vaguely feel what the fox was feeling and thinking. Currently, said fox was very off balance. For years he had been in that cage, able to feel all his chakra but perceive nothing. Now, he could feel things around him, but drawing on chakra was like drinking the ocean through a straw. His feeling wasn't a form of sight exactly, just a perception of things nearby. He also found that he had a somewhat empathic connection to the brat. Naruto was sitting on the floor of Kirin's living room when he felt it, a slight pull on his chakra, and realized the fox was trying to draw on it from inside the sword. Curious, he loosened his chakra control and let the fox take some. The sword started to flicker with a red glow. Kirin walked back into the room to see Naruto holding the sword, which was surrounded by a fluctuating red aura. He sat down on the couch and observed the boy. Kirin had never seen a situation like this before and was fascinated. Further experimentation revealed that the Kyuubi, if given enough chakra, could manifest parts of his body. This resulted in no small number of nicks and gashes on Naruto, as the fox was still just a little irked about the arm-severing incident. It was this, however, that led directly to the next discovery. Naruto could not only control how much chakra the fox got, he could use his own chakra to manifest. Nothing as complex as what the Kyuubi could manage. After all, Naruto had to his own body he had to worry about controlling. But he soon found he could send a small burst of chakra from the sword. Kirin suddenly broke the silence. Now I get it, he exclaimed. Naruto was about to ask what Kirin got, but didn't have time as the shark man just kept speaking. What was it you said before the ritual? that you felt the sword was part of your body. That's the power of your sword, to exude chakra from it as if it were a part of your body. But QB complicated things. That also explains the engraving. The red nine-tailed fox is obvious, but the blue dragon represents your chakra. Kiran rushed on, now completely lost in his own world. The two creatures in the engraving are fighting, but they're also intertwined, much as you must be. Therefore, your essence is mixed with the demons, and that's what's holding Kyubi's soul in the sword. Naruto looked cautiously at Kiran. Meaning? Meaning, Kiran said, sounding proud of himself, that the only reason Kyubi still exists now that he's apart from his chakra is because he is, in the literal sense, now part of you. You aren't two separate beings anymore, you're one being with two minds and two chakras. As amazingly comforted as Naruto was by this thought, it meant that the fox would have to think twice before killing him, and that was a good thing. Kiran continued to speak, completely oblivious to the mood. Now that that's over with, it's time for a sword-throwing lesson, he said with a grin. Naruto glared. He added a few fierce stimuli for extra effect. Or, Kiran continued, we could start the lesson first thing tomorrow morning. Naruto nodded. He needed some time alone with his sword. Once Kiran was out of the room, Naruto gave Kyubi enough chakra for the demon to manifest ahead. Naruto tried to play it cool, as if he had conversations with glowing red fox heads coming out of his sword every day. Well, brat, the demon said, this certainly is an interesting twist. It changes little, Naruto replied. You still need me to stay alive, and since I know how much you look forward to dying, I figure you'll contribute to my well-being no matter how much you hate me. Kyubi laughed. Yes, I suppose that's true. And I have to admit, this form allows me a great deal more freedom than that cage your belly in. Naruto cut him off. Before anything, let's get one thing straight. We hate each other, correct? The fox head nodded with a feral grin. But you need me to give you access to chakra or you're about as useful as Sakura. The fox flinched. That had been harsh. But I'm stuck with you either way. So here's how things work. You help me fight, which you love to do anyway, and in return, I'll give you chakra. The only rule is that if you ever hurt someone without what I think is a valid reason, I'll cut you off forever. Do we understand each other? I suppose, the demon said with just a hint of annoyance. He was stuck with the brat, so he would just take the opportunities to reap destruction as they came. 14 years in a cage had taught him some patience. Naruto sighed and collapsed on the floor as the head vanished. It was only supper time and he was exhausted. The evening was uneventful and the next morning, Naruto was up bright and early, getting ready for his throwing lesson. Kiran led him out of the hidden sound and into the forest, where he found a tree he liked, took Naruto to a spot 140 feet away, and told him to try and cut the tree in half. Naruto failed miserably the first few times, missing the tree or just nicking it, but on the ninth try, he felt that familiar tug that meant Sirai Kirite, or more specifically Kyubi, wanted chakra. He gave the sword some chakra as he released the throw, and the sword not only cut through the tree perfectly, it also curved around and returned to Naruto's hand. He grinned. The demon could control it using chakra. Kiran was taken slightly aback. Okay then, I guess it's on to lesson 2. Lesson 2 was learning the Shuriken Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, a skill Kiran claimed was necessary. Due to his experience with the regular variant, applying it to a weapon wasn't very hard, and Naruto picked it up quickly. The only thing was that Naruto called it the Kirite Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, since he claimed calling his sword a shuriken was insulting. The rest of the morning revealed that Kyubi could control 9 swords at once, the original and 8 shadow clones, all of which he delightedly used to reduce a rather large section of the forest to stumps. By 3 o'clock, Kiran was out of things to teach. He wasn't really a ninja after all, and declared that Naruto could go. Naruto rushed back town. The operation would start in 4 days, and he needed to be ready. The plan he had concocted with the 2 Akatsuki was simple. Naruto was going to invade the sound. Not for real, of course, but enough confusion would be generated and destruction caused that Hoshigaki Kiran's death would be easily overlooked. The problem had been how to make Naruto look like an invading army, but with careful planning, they had come up with an idea that would work and that, over the next 3 days, Naruto started to put into effect. The first thing he did was pose as a simple workman carrying a bag of fertilizer. What no one noticed was that the bag had a hole, and everywhere he walked, some fell out. What people didn't know was that there was gunpowder in the bag, not fertilizer. Kirin lived near the south gate, and Naruto, over the course of almost 2 days, had enough gunpowder just laying everywhere in the area like dust that the slightest spark would cause some to ignite, but people just passed it off as lighter malfunctions. He switched from workman to repairman and spent the last day setting up shuriken launchers on the tops of houses so that, when triggered, they would shoot the kunai into the air and make them fall in the street looking as though they had been thrown over the houses. Right before going to sleep the night before the mission, Naruto sat and thought, making sure he hadn't missed a part of the plan. The next morning, he would wake up at dawn and start his mock attack an hour later. Naruto was going to instigate his invasion using as many shadow clones as he could make, all using henge to look like various leaf nines. Kisame and Itachi would disguise themselves as sound nines and remove Kirin from his house before torching it. They weren't planning on being in the village more than 15 minutes. 8.5 hours from the sound, Kisame detected what felt like a very large number of approaching chakra sources and quickly woke his partner. 9 hours from the sound, Tamari led her advance team. Their job was to cover the north gate, so they would have to travel around the whole village to get to their positions, and they had to do it without alerting any sound sentries. 9.5 hours from the hidden sound, Tsunade was leading the main invasion force. They would rest a short while an hour from the village and attack at dawn. Half an hour before dawn, Naruto was knocked off of Kirin's couch, where he had been sleeping, to see Kisame and Itachi above him, disguised and looking like sound nines. He glanced at the clock. What's wrong? A leaf invasion force will be here in 10 minutes. Itachi said, as if talking about the weather. Naruto looked confused for a moment, a real one. Itachi nodded. Shit, Naruto muttered. This will be a pain, won't it? Itachi nodded again. Kisame left to wake his brother, and Naruto got off the couch and started to dress as he talked. So we'll have to fight our way out? Which way? Itachi thought for a moment. North. Assuming that you have everything set up for our plan, the first fire jutsu used in this area of town will light this place up, so we need to get out of the south end before the leaf arrive in. Itachi calmly pulled out a stick of strawberry pocky as he checked his watch. 7 minutes. Kisame ran back into the room, carrying a rather annoyed Kirin over his shoulder. Kirin's eyes widened as he saw Naruto with Itachi, but he quickly understood. All three ran out the back and leapt onto the roof. Hidden sound was in chaos, people running everywhere making last-minute defense preparations. All three moved their hands through seals, and for one instant, every eye in Hidden Sound was facing in their direction as together, they called, Kirigakure no Jutsu. The mist started to form. Between the three of them, there had been more chakra put into the mist than was required to summon 8 Gamabuntas, and soon, all of Hidden Sound and surrounding area was enshrouded with it. Kisame set his brother down, and he and Naruto, in somewhat creepy synchronization, drew their swords and flicked off their wrappings. Both Akatsuki raised their eyebrows at Naruto's black engraved blade, but decided to question Kirin later. Naruto reached into his pocket and carefully tied on his forehead protector, taking time to run his hands over the kanji he had scratched in all those weeks ago. He could feel Sirai Kirite pulse with excitement as he looked out into the me.